The Architecture of Two Souls, Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse, Act 1, Hopefully, You. The universe introduces us to people who are meant to become our greatest teachers. Unfortunately, the lesson occasionally arrives, disguised as tequila, a beach, and 20-something-year-old hormones. Welcome back. I'm glad you're here. I have another memory I'd like to borrow. This one needs a disclaimer. Some of you will absolutely fall in love with Dimitri. Some of you will want to throw him directly into the Pacific Ocean. You're both correct. Now, before anyone sharpens their pitchforks, remember something. The stars explain. They never excuse. That's our agreement. Good. Let's begin. Southern California. The kind of afternoon that makes people in colder climates question every life decision they've ever made. Palm trees, salt air, flip-flops, music somewhere in the distance, and one very ambitious young entrepreneur trying to build a future, one 14-hour workday at a time. Meet Dimitri. You've met his chart before: Aquarius Sun, Virgo Moon, Capricorn Venus, the philosopher, the builder, the golden retriever, who occasionally mistakes himself for a wolf. He's working harder than he ever has, building a fitness center almost entirely with his own hands. Every dollar, every dream, every blister feels like another brick in the life he's trying to create. And because the universe has a wonderfully twisted sense of humor, it decides this would also be an excellent time to surround him with extraordinarily beautiful women. Humans never do receive temptation at convenient times. Now, this story doesn't begin with Alyssa. Not exactly. It begins with Anna and Leah, two sisters, one friendship circle, 7 gorgeous women, a revolving door of beach days, barbecues, bonfires, birthdays, road trips, late-night tacos, and enough laughter to make adulthood temporarily forget it existed. Dimitri noticed Anna first. Understandable. Then he met Alyssa. Also understandable. Now, before anyone panics, nothing happened yet. Because here's something people misunderstand about Dimitri. He genuinely respected women deeply. That's what makes this story so complicated. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't running lines. He wasn't collecting phone numbers. He actually enjoyed being around women, talking with them, learning from them, laughing with them. His problem wasn't getting women. His problem was never learning where admiration should stop and temptation should begin. There's a difference, a very expensive difference. Let's borrow this moment. There we are. Careful where you step. Friendships are fragile. One wrong footprint, and somebody ends up in therapy. Come over here. Look at Dimitri. Notice something. He's flirting. Without flirting, that is Aquarius. Aquarius rarely enters a room thinking, how do I impress her? It asks, I wonder who she really is. People underestimate how intoxicating that can be, because most attraction begins with being seen. Aquarius has an unusual gift. It can make someone feel like they're the only person in the room, not because it's trying to, because curiosity is one of the purest forms of attention. Now, let's add Virgo Moon. Virgo doesn't simply listen. Virgo catalogs. She mentions her favorite author. He remembers. She talks about her favorite songs. He remembers. She casually mentions her grandmother makes the best tamales she's ever tasted. 3 months later, he asks, how's your grandmother doing? Women, notice that. Virgo Moon doesn't create romance. It creates remembrance, and remembrance feels suspiciously like intimacy, especially to someone who has spent most of their life feeling overlooked. Now, let's go one layer deeper. Capricorn Venus. This placement fascinates me because it completely contradicts the reputation Dimitri eventually earns. Capricorn Venus doesn't want 50 lovers. It wants one empire, one teammate, one person to build an entire life beside. So why does a man with Capricorn Venus become the wolf? Excellent question. Don't answer it yet. We're only 5 minutes into the documentary. The best mysteries need time. Weeks pass. Beach, coffee, friends, house parties, movies, more beach. Everything feels friendly. Maybe too friendly. Now Dimitri has a problem. Not a cosmic problem, a male problem. He's beginning to suspect he's been promoted to the friend zone. Now, the friend zone has inspired more mythology than ancient Greece. Some people think it's a place. It isn't. It's uncertainty. And uncertainty makes young men do wonderfully stupid things. Which brings us to the phone call to be continued. End of Act 1, Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 2, The Friend Zone, Mars, and a Terrible Joke. I've watched humanity for a very long time, long enough to discover there are only 3 things young men fear: public speaking, commitment, and hearing the words. I think we'd make really great friends. That last one has launched more terrible ideas than alcohol, which brings us to Dimitri. Weeks have passed, beach days, house parties, movie nights, friends, friends of friends, friends of sisters, sisters of friends. Honestly, keeping track of this social circle required color-coded spreadsheets. Fortunately, Virgo moons love spreadsheets. Dimitri is seeing Alyssa everywhere. And every time he does, something strange happens. She doesn't flirt. She doesn't chase. She doesn't tease. She simply enjoys him. That is infinitely more dangerous because attention is exciting. Peace is addictive. Let's borrow this memory. There we go. Don't mind the seagull. He's been trying to steal that sandwich for almost 14 years. Persistence. Admirable. Now, come over here. Look at Alyssa. We've spent enough time talking about Dimitri. Let's finally meet. The Lighthouse. Everybody sees Sagittarius first. Adventure, travel, laughter, optimism. The woman who somehow convinces everyone that driving 3 hours for tacos is completely reasonable. Sagittarius women don't merely collect experiences, they collect stories, and every story becomes another reason to fall in love with life. It's infectious. That's why people gather around them. They don't manufacture energy, they amplify it. Now, here's where people stop reading the chart. Big mistake. Because underneath that adventurous Sagittarius sun lives something completely different. Capricorn Venus. Now that's interesting. Very interesting. Because Venus tells us how someone loves. Not how they flirt, not how they seduce, how they build attachment. Capricorn Venus isn't looking for fireworks, it's looking for foundations. She isn't evaluating whether tonight is exciting. She's quietly asking, could I build a life with this person? Would he show up? Would he keep his word? Would he protect what we create together? That's Capricorn. Long game, always, which creates a fascinating contradiction. On the outside, she looks spontaneous. On the inside, she's interviewing husbands. Humans hide entire universes beneath first impressions. Okay, let's press play on this moment. The phone rings. They're laughing, talking about weekend plans. Then she asks, so, what are you doing tonight? Silence. Now, I'd like everyone listening to remember being 20-something. Confidence often arrives 5 seconds before wisdom. Dimitri smiles. Hopefully, you. Silence. Not good silence. The kind of silence where your soul quietly whispers, oh no. Then she explodes. What did you just say? That's disrespectful. I thought you were different. She keeps going. He listens for approximately 3.5 seconds. Then, Aquarius. Fine. Bye. Click. Months of silence. Humans. There are easier ways to flirt. Let's steal 30 seconds from history. There. Much better. Now, everyone listening thinks the joke ended the relationship. No. The joke simply revealed two completely different planets. Let's start with Dimitri. Aquarius communicates through surprise. Aquarius believes. Humor lowers walls. Unexpected comments create honesty. It pokes, teases, experiments. It isn't testing attraction, it's testing freedom. Can we joke like this? Can we challenge each other? Can we survive awkwardness? Aquarius doesn't fear awkward moments. It trusts them. Because awkwardness usually tells the truth. Now, let's move over here. Alyssa. Notice her expression. This wasn't about sex, not really. This was about timing. Remember Capricorn Venus? Respect. Before romance, Capricorn doesn't want to feel chosen because she's available. She wants to feel chosen because she's valuable. That one sentence. Accidentally skipped 3 chapters. He thought he made a joke. She thought he skipped courtship. Neither one understood the other's operating system. Here's something fascinating. Watch Sagittarius. People assume Sagittarius women are impossible to offend. Not true. Sagittarius loves boldness, but it despises insincerity. Her sun wanted confidence. Her Venus wanted character. The joke landed exactly between those two worlds. Wrong target, wrong timing, wrong runway. Let's wake them up. Click. Months pass, no texts, no calls, no dramatic speeches. Just life. Funny thing about time, it has a habit of sanding down sharp edges. One afternoon, a message appears. Beach tomorrow? That's it. No apology, no explanation, no 23-paragraph manifesto. Just beach tomorrow? She smiles. Sure. Sometimes healing begins with the smallest sentence, the beach, the same crew. Anna, Leah, the girls, the boys, music, volleyball, coolers, sunburns, someone inevitably forgetting sunscreen. Again, the rhythm returns. Slowly, not lovers, not strangers, something in between. Now here's where Dimitri accidentally makes one of the smartest decisions of his life. He stops trying. No pressure, no strategy, no game. He simply belongs. Women have an extraordinary radar for performance. When a man stops auditioning, that's often when they finally meet him. Aquarius has one superpower: authenticity. The moment he stopped trying to manufacture attraction, his actual personality finally had room to do the work. Weeks become months. The group grows closer. Barbecues become traditions. Random Tuesdays somehow become celebrations. The girls cook. The guys show up hungry. Life becomes beautifully repetitive, the kind of repetition people don't appreciate until it's gone. And then, one ordinary afternoon, history decides. It's finally tired of waiting. The sun is lower now. Dimitri has to leave early. Work calls. He hugs one friend, fist bumps another, waves goodbye. Then he reaches Alyssa. No planning, no calculation, no internal committee meeting. He leans down and kisses her. Not passionately, not dramatically, simply like someone saying goodbye to a woman he'd apparently been in love with long before he admitted it to himself. She kisses him back. Both freeze. Internally, he walks backward, smiling. His brain has completely left the building. Did that just happen? Yes, yes, it did. Let's borrow one final moment. Come here. Stand right between them. Look closely. Neither one planned that kiss. Here's why. Aquarius spends weeks pretending. It doesn't know what it already knows. Sagittarius spends weeks pretending. She's just enjoying the adventure. Capricorn Venus quietly falls in love long before it says the words. And sometimes, when the chart has finished all of its calculations, the body makes the decision first. That's exactly what happened. Not destiny, not magic, just two nervous systems finally catching up to what their hearts had already figured out. And ladies and gentlemen, our lighthouse has just met her wolf. Neither of them has any idea what's coming next. End of Act 2, Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 3, The Candy Store. There is an old misconception. That temptation begins the moment someone beautiful walks into the room. It doesn't. Beauty has started remarkably few stories. Attention. Now that's another matter entirely. Attention has built kingdoms, destroyed marriages, started wars, and convinced otherwise intelligent people that one more conversation couldn't possibly matter. Come, I'd like to borrow one of my favorite memories. Careful. This one smells like sunscreen, sea salt, fresh cut cedar, and just enough perfume to make good judgment quietly excuse itself for the evening. Ah, Southern California, you really did have a talent for making ordinary Tuesdays feel like the opening scene of a film. Look around. The beach is beginning to empty. Music drifts lazily from someone's portable speakers. A volleyball lands somewhere behind us. Someone laughs so hard they nearly spill their drink. A breeze carries the scent of salt across warm skin. Nobody wants to leave. That's always the dangerous hour. Not midnight, not last call. This one, the hour when nobody's looking at the clock anymore. Now, find Dimitri. No, don't look for the loudest man. He rarely was. There, he's helping someone carry a cooler, laughing at a joke that wasn't particularly funny, remembering everyone's name, introducing people who should have met months ago. Watch what happens. One woman adjusts her sunglasses just to look a little longer. Another unconsciously angles her chair toward him. Someone else laughs before he's even finished speaking, not because he's performing, because he's listening, really listening. Do you know how rare that is, especially in your 20s? To be heard, without interruption, without someone waiting for their turn to speak. Humans underestimate the intoxicating power of undivided attention. Let's borrow this moment. There we are, beautiful. Time never complains, as long as we remember to give it back. Come here, stand beside me, not too close. Attraction is easier to study when it doesn't know it's being observed. Now, watch her, the brunette. She hasn't touched him, not once, but she keeps finding reasons to stand just a little nearer. Notice that? Most men wouldn't. They'd be waiting for a compliment or a number or a kiss. Women often speak in inches, not sentences. One step closer, a hand resting on the back of his chair, her shoulder lingering beside his, just a heartbeat longer than necessary. Tiny permissions, tiny invitations. The body usually whispers, long before the mouth finds its courage. Now let's look at Dimitri. Aquarius. Poor Aquarius. Everyone thinks this sign is impossible to read. It's actually very simple. Aquarius falls in love with presence when someone is fully alive, curious, playful, unapologetically themselves. Aquarius leans in. It isn't chasing beauty. It's chasing electricity, the feeling that something unexpected could happen at any moment. Now add Virgo moon. Virgo notices details no one else catches. The way she brushes sand from her ankle, the tiny scar near her wrist, the way she lowers her voice, only when she's speaking about something that matters. He remembers all of it, not because he's trying to impress her, because Virgo quietly catalogs people, the way librarians catalog books. Every detail has its place, and there's something profoundly disarming about realizing someone has been paying attention. Let's wake the memory. The sun sinks lower. The conversation shifts. Somebody suggests heading back to the house. There are always more people, more music, more food, more stories. The evening stretches like it has no intention of ending. Neither does youth. The house feels almost alive. Windows open, music drifting from one room into another. Someone chopping limes, someone else dancing barefoot in the kitchen. The girls move through the house with the effortless ease of sisters. The guys are laughing over something completely forgettable. This isn't a party anymore. It's a small civilization, built on trust, shared meals, inside jokes, and the beautiful illusion that this season of life might somehow last forever. Now, I'd like to show you something. Not because it's dramatic, because it's almost invisible. Come over here. Watch Dimitri. He's sitting on the edge of the patio. One woman sits beside him. Another leans against the railing across from him. They're talking about travel, childhood, music, nothing flirtatious, nothing improper. And yet, notice the atmosphere. The conversation has developed that curious warmth, where nobody seems interested in checking their phone. Time begins behaving differently around certain people. Minutes, quietly, become hours. That's chemistry's favorite disguise. Not urgency, ease. Here's where astrology becomes fascinating. People often ask me, can a birth chart explain attraction? Not entirely. But it can explain why certain people feel strangely familiar. Aquarius carries possibility. Sagittarius carries adventure. Two sparks meeting in dry grass. Capricorn Venus, on the other hand, is searching for permanence, a harbor, a place to finally exhale. And there lies Dimitri's contradiction. One part of him wanted to build a home. Another part kept wandering through every open doorway, wondering what beautiful conversation might be waiting on the other side. The chart doesn't create the contradiction. It simply names it. Now, watch the room one last time. A woman catches his eye from across the kitchen. Nothing happens. She smiles. He smiles back. That's all. History has an amusing habit of hiding enormous consequences inside moments everyone else forgets. Remember this, not because anything happened, because this right here is how almost every complicated love story begins. Not with betrayal, not with passion, not even with desire, with the quiet, dangerous belief that admiration is harmless. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of this memory, the first domino is already beginning to lean. End of Act 3, Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 4, The Gravity Well. Come. Not too quickly. Some memories need to be approached. The way you'd approach a campfire. Too close, and you'll miss the warmth. Too far, and you'll never understand why everyone gathered around it. I'd like to introduce you to something I've observed for thousands of years. I call it the gravity well. Some people enter a room, and everyone notices them. That's charisma. But every so often, someone enters a room, and everyone quietly becomes a little more themselves. That's gravity. Dimitri had become gravity. He never saw it. Almost nobody ever does. Look around. The beach has long since given way to another evening, another gathering, another backyard glowing beneath strands of cafe lights. Someone's grilling. Someone's arguing over music. Someone's dancing barefoot on warm concrete. Someone is pretending not to look at someone else. Humans. You really are wonderfully transparent. Stand over here. This is the best angle. Watch Dimitri. He's fixing a loose patio chair without being asked. 5 minutes later, he's opening a bottle of wine for someone. Then he's helping another friend move a couch. Then he's laughing with a woman about a story she told him. Nearly 3 weeks ago, she stops laughing just for a heartbeat because she realizes he remembered. Do you know what happens inside a human heart? When it discovers it has been remembered, it's an extraordinary feeling. For a fleeting moment, you believe you mattered. Now let's borrow 30 seconds. There we are. Don't disturb anything, especially that glass on the table. I've knocked over before. History becomes surprisingly difficult to explain after that. Now watch her. She's standing close enough that his sleeve brushes hers whenever he turns. Neither one moves away. Neither one notices. Consciously, bodies are wonderfully honest. They often understand, long before the mind is willing to admit, that the air has changed now. Let's read the sky. Aquarius. People often mistake Aquarius for detachment. Not at all. Aquarius becomes fascinated by people who surprise it, who challenge it, who make conversation feel like discovery. Every interesting soul feels like another unexplored country. Now add Virgo moon. Virgo doesn't flirt loudly. Virgo studies. It notices cadence, vocabulary, how someone smiles. When they forget they're smiling, Virgo quietly assembles a portrait. Most people feel seen before they ever feel desired. And sometimes being deeply seen can become the most intimate experience of all. Let's wake the room. Music changes. The conversation breaks into smaller circles. The evening becomes softer. The loud laughter has settled into quieter voices. This is where chemistry prefers to live, not beneath flashing lights, but beneath ordinary ones. One woman asked Dmitri to step outside for some air. They're only talking, nothing more. The moon hangs above them. The ocean answers somewhere beyond the houses. She tells him about a dream she abandoned years ago. He doesn't interrupt. He simply listens, really listens. When she's finished, he says, "I think you still could." She looks at him, as though nobody has ever returned that possibility to her before. Careful, moments like these can become far more intimate than kisses. Come here, closer. I want to show you something invisible. See her shoulders? They've relaxed. Her breathing has changed. She's no longer trying to impress him. She's simply present. That's what true attention does. It lowers armor. Humans often confuse seduction with pursuit. I've found the most dangerous form of attraction is safety, the feeling that someone has quietly made room for all the parts of you normally keep hidden. Now, let's step over here. Alyssa, there she is, laughing with her sister, completely radiant. Do you know what makes this story tragic? She isn't foolish. Quite the opposite. She trusts him because he's given her every reason to. Trust isn't blindness. It's accumulated evidence. Remember that. Every shared sunset, every road trip, every dinner cooked together, every sleepy Sunday morning, every kiss before work. Capricorn Venus keeps careful records. It builds confidence, one ordinary day at a time. Now let's look at something fascinating. Alyssa's Taurus moon. Most people imagine loyalty as dramatic. It isn't. Loyalty usually looks like this. Setting aside the last piece of dessert because you know they'll want it later. Remembering how they take their coffee. Saving a story because you'd rather tell them in person. Love lives in repetition. And Taurus understands repetition better than almost any sign in the zodiac. She's building a home, brick by invisible brick, completely unaware that Dmitri has begun wandering through rooms where admiration feels effortless and responsibility feels wonderfully far away. Listen carefully. This next part is important. Temptation rarely begins with desire. It often begins with curiosity. What if I stayed another 20 minutes? What if I answered one more question? What if I accepted one more invitation? Curiosity is a marvelous servant, a dangerous master. Every affair I've ever witnessed began with someone believing they were still in control. Now, look at Dmitri. He still loves Alyssa deeply. That's what makes this so painfully human. His Capricorn Venus still dreams of forever. But another part of him, the younger part, the wounded part, the part still trying to prove that losing the gym hadn't diminished his worth, finds itself lingering whenever admiration quietly wraps itself around his uncertainty. That's not love, that's reassurance. The tragedy is how easily one can masquerade as the other. Let's return this memory. We'll need it again because the next one is where the wolf mistakes applause for nourishment. And once that happens, even the brightest lighthouse begins to wonder whether its light can still be seen. End of Act 4. Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 5, The First Domino. Walk with me, easy now. Memories become fragile. The closer they drift toward regret, you'll notice something peculiar. The happiest memories and the saddest ones often smell exactly the same. Ocean air, fresh coffee, someone's expensive perfume, a laugh that no longer exists. Amazing how the heart remembers scents long after it forgets conversations. Now, I'd like to show you the first domino, not the biggest one, the first, because history is never rewritten by earthquakes. It's rewritten by tiny shifts. Nobody believes matter. Look around. Business is growing again, not the gym. That chapter has quietly folded itself into memory. This is something new, smaller, more intimate, the kind of place where everyone somehow knows everyone. Creative people, artists, photographers, dancers, entrepreneurs, beautiful, complicated, passionate people, a room filled with individuals who still believed their greatest chapter hadn't happened yet. Those are my favorite rooms. They're also incredibly dangerous. Let's borrow this afternoon. There we are. Don't bump that mirror. Trust me, 7 years later, someone will swear it was always crooked. Now, watch Dmitri. Notice something. He isn't trying to impress anyone. He's fixing a light fixture. A woman thanks him. Another asks for help carrying something. Someone else asks about business. Another asks about fitness. He's moving through the room the same way he's always moved. Useful, capable, present. Do you remember Virgo moon? Virgo has a curious way of loving. It repairs things. Sometimes it repairs people. That's extraordinarily beautiful. Until someone begins confusing being needed with being loved. Those are cousins, not twins. Watch carefully. A conversation lingers, then another. Nothing inappropriate, nothing hidden, just people talking. But now, observe the room, the way an astronomer observes the sky. One woman keeps finding reasons to return to the conversation. Another catches his eye, then smiles to herself before looking away. One compliments his hands, not because of how they look, because they tell a story. Hands that build, hands that carry, hands that create. Humans have always been strangely fascinated by hands, perhaps because they reveal what a life has touched. Come here, closer. Do you hear that? No? Exactly. That's the sound of admiration becoming expectation. One compliment becomes two. Two become routine. Routine quietly becomes identity. And somewhere, without asking permission, Dmitri begins believing that this version of himself must always exist. The man who lights up every room. The man everyone wants another conversation with. The man who never stops smiling, even when he's exhausted, especially when he's exhausted. Now, let's look at the chart again. Aquarius, you marvelous contradiction. Aquarius doesn't intentionally collect admirers. It collects stories. Every person feels like another universe, another possibility, another fascinating perspective. It genuinely enjoys people, sometimes far too much. Now, Capricorn Venus, still dreaming, still imagining. A quiet house, shared mornings, growing old beside one remarkable woman. Do you see the conflict? His heart and his habits have begun speaking different languages. That is where suffering begins. Let's wake the room. Someone opens another bottle of wine. Music softens. The conversations divide into pairs. The evening slows. There is something about the final hour of a gathering when laughter becomes quieter, voices become gentler, and people begin saying things they hadn't planned to share. A woman tells Dmitri about a fear she's never admitted aloud. He listens. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't rescue. He simply stays. When she's finished, she exhales as though she's been holding that breath for years. Now look at her. Not desire, relief. Sometimes those feelings borrow each other's clothing. Humans confuse them all the time. I'd like to tell you a secret. No, lean in a little closer. Every relationship contains invisible boundaries. Most of them are never spoken. They are simply understood. The trouble is, invisible boundaries can only protect us if we remember. They're there. Watch this. He laughs. She touches his sleeve only for a second, then lets go, perfectly innocent. By itself, history rarely announces which moment will become the one people remember. Sometimes, it's simply the first time. Neither person steps backward. Do you know what the ancients believed? Not the astrologers, the poets. They believed desire entered the world not through the eyes, but through imagination. The moment someone wondered, what would life feel like if I crossed one more step? That question has undone more empires than armies ever managed. Now, let's leave this memory, not because anything happened, because that's precisely the point. Everyone waits for the dramatic mistake. Almost nobody notices the quiet rehearsal. And our wolf has just taken his first step onto a stage he still believes he can walk away from whenever he chooses. History has seen that confidence before. It almost never ends the way people imagine. End of Act 5. Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 6, The Empire of Applause. Come check this out. I'd like to show you the most dangerous room Dmitri ever entered. No, it wasn't a nightclub. It wasn't a bedroom. It wasn't even a party. It was a room where everyone already believed he was extraordinary. Those rooms have swallowed far better men. Let's borrow this season. Careful, this memory carries splinters. The gym has fallen. The dream he built with blistered hands has quietly become a story he tells instead of a place he unlocks every morning. For weeks, he walks around feeling strangely transparent. You wouldn't notice it. Most people didn't. He still smiled, still joked, still carried everyone else's burdens. Virgo moon has a remarkable talent for looking composed while privately reorganizing an earthquake. Then opportunity arrives, not dressed as opportunity. Life rarely has that kind of honesty. It arrives inside a pole fitness studio, mirrors, steel, music, Athleticism masquerading as elegance, elegance masquerading as confidence, people forever chasing stronger bodies and quieter minds. Dimitri builds, again, walls, platforms, lighting, shelves. Problems disappear wherever his hands happen to land. I've always admired builders. They create certainty in uncertain places. Now, stand beside me. Watch carefully. Do you notice something? The women don't simply thank him, they trust him. One asks for advice. Another asks for help with a business idea. Someone else wants his opinion. Another lingers, long after the question has been answered. Not because she needs another answer, because she enjoys the feeling of being understood. There's that word again, understood. You'd be amazed how many people mistake that feeling for destiny. Let's read the heavens. Aquarius, still collecting people, still fascinated by possibility. Aquarius genuinely believes every conversation might change a life. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it changes the wrong one. Now, Virgo moon. Virgo notices vulnerability. It naturally steps toward it, offers encouragement, practical advice, solutions, hope. That makes Virgo wonderfully healing. It also means people often mistake compassion for invitation, not because Virgo intended it, because lonely hearts translate kindness into possibility. Now, Capricorn Venus, the architect, still dreaming of one extraordinary woman, one extraordinary home, one extraordinary legacy, but something has happened. Watch closely. Capricorn Venus has begun negotiating with wounded pride, and wounded pride has a dreadful attorney. It whispers, after everything you've survived, don't you deserve? The sentence never finishes. It doesn't have to. Humans are remarkably talented at finishing their own justifications. Let's wake the memory. Another evening, another gathering, another celebration. Someone is showing photographs from a fashion shoot, designers, models, music, creative chaos. One woman slips her arm through Dimitri's while laughing at something ridiculous. He smiles. She lets go. Nothing happened. Remember that. Nothing happened, but something changed. He stopped being surprised by admiration. Once admiration becomes normal, the soul quietly starts asking for more. Come here. I want to show you the bottle again. Remember it? The one with the tiny hole. Look, it's almost empty, no matter how many compliments pour inside. By morning, it's dry again. That's the cruel thing about validation. It evaporates overnight. Real confidence doesn't. One afternoon, a woman stays behind after everyone leaves. The room is quiet. Sunlight spills across polished wood. Dust floats lazily through the air. She thanks him, not for fixing equipment, not for business advice, for believing in her. You know, that's one of the most intimate gifts a person can give another. To believe in a version of someone they've almost stopped believing in themselves. She reaches over, straightens the collar of his shirt, smiles, leaves. That's all. Nothing happened. Not externally. Internally. An entirely different story. Come, let's pause here. This is where most storytellers would begin the affair. I won't. Because they're wrong. The affair doesn't begin with a kiss. It begins when someone else's admiration starts feeling more restorative than going home. Remember that. It's one of the saddest sentences I've ever learned. Now let's visit home. There's Alyssa, barefoot, music playing softly through the kitchen. She's cooking again, not because she has to, because she knows. After difficult seasons, ordinary rituals can become anchors. She sees Dimitri walk through the door and smiles. the kind of smile that only appears when someone has become part of your nervous system. No performance, no seduction, just peace. Taurus moon, you beautiful creature, you understand something. The rest of the zodiac spends decades trying to learn. Home isn't a place, it's a person who lets your shoulders finally relax. And yet, watch Dimitri. He's here, physically, emotionally. Part of him is still standing inside rooms where strangers looked at him as though he were the most interesting man alive, not because he wanted another woman, because he missed the man he believed himself to be before losing everything he'd built. There's an enormous difference. One is desire, the other is grief, wearing someone else's cologne. Listen, this next lesson has nothing to do with astrology, everything to do with being human. If you ever become addicted to applause, silence will begin feeling like rejection. That's exactly what happened. Not because Alyssa loved him less, because peace cannot compete with the chemical fireworks of constant novelty until one day the fireworks stop and you're forced to discover whether peace was the treasure all along. Let's return this memory. We'll need it later because our wolf is about to make a mistake. He'll spend years trying to understand, not because he didn't love the lighthouse, but because he spent too long trying to convince himself that admiration could heal a wound only self-forgiveness ever could. End of Act 6, Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 7. The wolf forgets the way home. Come. Walk quietly. This memory still echoes. You know, people often ask me, what does betrayal look like? They expect me to describe a kiss, a hotel room, a confession. Nah, betrayal is much quieter than that. It usually begins the first time someone decides not to tell the whole truth, long before they tell an actual lie. Come, I'll show you. Let's borrow this evening. There we are, another gathering, another celebration, another collection of remarkable people trying very hard to convince themselves they were adults. The music is louder tonight, the laughter easier. Someone has opened another bottle. Someone else insists nobody has work tomorrow. They're wrong. But youth has always negotiated, rather creatively, with tomorrow. Look around. You'll notice something different. The room has changed, not physically, energetically. Dimitri is no longer the newcomer. He's become part of the mythology, the builder, the trainer, the designer, the man who somehow remembered everyone's stories, the one people looked for without realizing they were looking. There's danger in becoming the person everyone expects to make the evening memorable. Come here, stand beside me, watch the women. No, not with judgment, with curiosity. One is laughing at something he said 5 minutes ago. Another catches herself watching him while he's helping someone else. One smiles, not because she's imagining a kiss, but because she's imagining what it might feel like. To be understood that completely, there's a tremendous difference. People rarely hunger for bodies. They hunger to be profoundly seen. Sometimes the body simply arrives as part of the invitation. Let's read the heavens. Aquarius, still collecting souls, still believing. Every stranger contains another fascinating universe. Aquarius rarely seduces intentionally. It simply becomes deeply interested. That can be intoxicating. Now Virgo moon. Virgo notices when someone isn't laughing quite as hard as everyone else. When confidence slips, just for a second. when sadness hides behind perfect makeup or practiced humor. Virgo instinctively moves closer to help, to encourage, to reassure. Beautiful, unless reassurance begins feeding a different appetite. Listen carefully. Do you hear it? No. That's because temptation never sounds like temptation. It sounds like this. I've never told anyone this before. You're easy to talk to. I don't know why I feel so comfortable around you. History has hidden astonishing consequences inside perfectly innocent sentences. Let's wake the room. Most people have drifted inside. Only a handful remain outside beneath the patio lights. She walks over. Not dramatically, not seductively, simply closer, close enough that neither of them needs to raise their voice. They're talking about childhood, dreams, parents, fear, funny, how attraction almost always disguises itself as honesty. She brushes an invisible speck of dust from the sleeve of his shirt. Neither one acknowledges it. Neither one has to. Some gestures are conversations without words. Come, I want to show you something. Look at Dimitri. Really look. He's smiling, but not because he's imagining where this evening might end. He's smiling because for just a few moments, he doesn't feel like the man who lost his dream. He feels chosen, admired, necessary. That's the addiction, not desire, recognition. Remember the bottle? Look, it's empty again. Amazing. Hours of applause disappear overnight. That's why applause can never become identity. It demands another performance and another until eventually you forget who you were before the audience arrived. Now, watch the first domino. No kiss, not tonight. Something much smaller. He chooses not to mention Alyssa. Interesting, isn't it? She wasn't hidden. She simply didn't appear in the conversation. Funny thing about omission, it often arrives dressed as convenience. Let's pause there. Beautiful. This is the moment, not because anyone crossed a physical boundary, because Dimitri quietly crossed an internal one. He discovered he enjoyed being perceived as available. He didn't plan to. He didn't wake up hoping for it. But there it was, one tiny compromise, one sentence left unsaid, one version of himself allowed to exist for just one evening. Every larger betrayal I've ever witnessed has started with someone becoming comfortable with a smaller one. Now let's visit home. Come. The house is quiet. There's Alyssa curled into one corner of the couch, a book resting against her chest. She tried to stay awake. Again, the porch light is still on. Not because she doubts him, because she likes him coming home. To light. You know, Taurus moons have extraordinary rituals. They don't even realize they're creating them. The light, the warm meal, the familiar blanket, the kiss at the door. They build safety, one evening at a time. Capricorn Venus still believes. She sees the future, marriage, children, shared holidays, gray hair, laugh lines, growing old, beside one extraordinary man. She doesn't know that extraordinary men can sometimes become extraordinarily lost. Come back with me. One final stop. The party has ended. Dimitri walks toward his truck, alone. The night air is cooler now. The laughter has faded. He's carrying something invisible. Not guilt, not yet. Permission. That's heavier because guilt can make a person change. Permission makes repeating ourselves feel surprisingly reasonable. You know, people often ask me, when did the wolf appear? They expect me to point to an affair, a confession, a shattered promise. No, the wolf appeared. The very first night, the builder stopped introducing himself. And once you stop remembering who you truly are, the world becomes remarkably eager to introduce you to someone else. Let's return this memory. We'll need it because next time, the first domino won't simply lean, it will finally fall. End of Act 7. Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 8, When the Builder Left the Room. Come with me. I've delayed showing you this memory for as long as I could, not because it's scandalous, but because it marks the evening Dmitri quietly stopped introducing himself as the man he had always intended to become. History has a peculiar sense of humor that way. It rarely announces life's defining moments with thunder. More often, they arrive disguised as ordinary Tuesdays, an extra invitation, or one conversation that lingers a little longer than wisdom would have preferred. Let's borrow this evening. There we are. Leave everything exactly where you found it. Memories are temperamental creatures, and if you rearrange them too much, people spend years wondering why their lives suddenly feel unfamiliar. Look around. The city feels unusually alive tonight. Music spills out of open windows, conversations overlap from table to table, and every restaurant patio seems convinced it's hosting the most important gathering in Los Angeles. Dmitri moves through the room the way he always has, comfortable, generous, impossible to ignore without ever trying to become the center of attention. That's still the builder. That's still the man Alyssa fell in love with. The wolf hasn't arrived. Not yet. Now I'd like you to meet someone. No. Her name isn't important. History has introduced me to thousands like her. She is intelligent enough to ask questions instead of performing answers. Confident enough not to compete for attention, curious enough to make conversation feel like exploration instead of entertainment. Watch Dmitri. Notice he doesn't cross the room. He simply notices that she noticed him. That tiny distinction has redirected more human lives than anyone likes admitting. Let's pause the evening for a moment. There, much better. Do you see what just happened? Nothing. That's exactly my point. Most people imagine temptation as some dramatic collision of desire and opportunity. In reality, it usually begins with mutual curiosity. Two people discovering that conversation seems strangely effortless. That laughter arrives a little more quickly, and that silence has somehow become just as enjoyable as words. Astrology explains why this matters. Aquarius doesn't merely enjoy beautiful people. Aquarius becomes fascinated by minds that feel like unexplored countries. Every remarkable conversation whispers the same dangerous promise: there's more to discover. Virgo moon quietly joins the conspiracy by remembering everything, the tiny details, the passing comments, the dreams mentioned almost as jokes. People have a habit of falling slightly in love with anyone who remembers who they are when everyone else remembers only what they look like. That combination can become intoxicating, not because Aquarius is seductive, because it is sincerely interested. There is very little more disarming than genuine attention. Let's wake the memory. Hours have passed. The room has grown smaller without anyone noticing. Groups have dissolved into pairs. The music has softened. The sort of conversations that only happen after midnight have quietly taken over the evening. She asks him a simple question. So, is there someone waiting for you at home? Listen carefully, not to what he says, to what he doesn't. There it is, that silence, that single heartbeat where truth politely clears its throat before compromise interrupts. He smiles. It's complicated. No, it wasn't. There was a woman at home who believed she was building forever. There was a woman who still set aside the last piece of dessert because she knew he'd want it later. There was a woman who measured love in ordinary Tuesdays instead of extraordinary Fridays. Nothing was complicated, except the story Dmitri had quietly begun telling himself. I've often wondered why intelligent people lie to themselves before they ever lie to anyone else. Perhaps because the conscience is an excellent attorney. It never asks us to become villains all at once. It simply edits the language. I'm not hiding anything. I'm just enjoying the conversation. Nothing's happened. Remarkable. 3 perfectly ordinary sentences, each one standing politely beside the first domino. Come with me. They're leaving now. Not together, just in the same direction. How wonderfully convenient. Cities have always been filled with remarkable coincidences. They walk. The night has cooled. The noise of the evening fades behind them until all that's left is the sound of footsteps and the comfortable rhythm of 2 people who have discovered they no longer need to fill every silence. She laughs. He laughs. She reaches for his hand for the briefest moment before thinking better of it. Or perhaps not thinking at all. Sometimes instinct arrives before intention has had time to object. Let's be respectful historians for just a moment. I believe this is where we quietly look toward the stars and allow the evening to continue without our supervision. Human beings have always possessed an extraordinary talent for believing they can borrow tomorrow's consequences without paying today's price. I'll spare you the architectural details. A contortionist would be proud. Pressure was applied to all the right places. Things were said your father would not want to hear. And noises crossed the spectrum from harmonic to guttural. Is that someone I hear brushing their teeth and rinsing with mouthwash? Done already. Let me take a peek before you open your eyes. Oh, yikes, my bad. That was, oh, well, never mind. By the time dawn finally found the room again, the air carried that unmistakable stillness which follows decisions that cannot be folded neatly back into yesterday. The furniture appeared quietly exhausted. Several articles of clothing had developed astonishingly selective memories, and reason, poor thing, lost the battle. There's one more place we need to visit. Home. The porch light is still on. Alyssa has fallen asleep on the couch. A blanket is draped over her legs. A book rests open against her shoulder. Dinner sits covered on the counter because she wasn't sure when he'd be home, but she wanted him to know someone had been thinking about him anyway. This is where the astrology becomes heartbreaking. People speak endlessly about passion, Mars, Venus, irresistible attraction, and magnetic synastry. They rarely speak about the quiet power of a Taurus moon. A Taurus moon says, I'll keep the light on. A Capricorn Venus says, I'll keep building even when the weather changes. Neither one can protect a relationship from a person who has begun looking for pieces of themselves in places where they were never meant to be found. Dmitri stands in the doorway longer than he realizes. For the first time that evening, the applause is gone, the laughter is gone, the chemistry is gone. Only truth remains, and truth has a way of becoming deafening once the music finally stops. You know, people often believe guilt arrives after consequences. It doesn't. Guilt arrives the moment the performance ends and you're left alone with the audience that matters most, yourself. Our builder is still in there, barely, but tonight The wolf has learned something dangerous. He has discovered that crossing the line was easier than imagining it, and history has taught me that the second crossing is almost always quieter than the first. End of Act 8. Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 9, The Price of Applause. There are memories that change our lives because they hurt us, and then there are memories that change us because they quietly redraw the map of what we believe is possible. This evening belongs to the second category, and that's precisely why it deserves our attention. People often assume the first affair is where everything begins. It isn't. Sometimes the first crack appears inside the relationship itself, not through betrayal, but through an unexpected experience that neither person fully understands until years later. Let's borrow this evening. The apartment is unusually quiet. Music hums softly from another room. The windows are open to a warm California night, and Alyssa is lying comfortably across the bed beside her closest friend. They're flipping through magazines, laughing at advertisements, debating which dresses they would never wear and which vacations they absolutely intended to take someday. It is wonderfully ordinary. The sort of ordinary that never expects history to interrupt. Dmitri pokes his head into the room. Anybody want something to drink? Without even looking up, two voices answer almost simultaneously. Yes. He smiles and heads toward the kitchen. Halfway down the hallway, something curious happens. Not in the room. Inside his own mind. A ridiculous thought arrives with the confidence of an old friend. He stops, turns around, leans casually against the doorway and says with the exaggerated confidence of a man attempting to be funny, "When I come back, you two had better be naked." Silence. He immediately regrets it. There's a very particular kind of embarrassment reserved for hearing your own words echo back inside your head. Dmitri walks into the kitchen muttering to himself, wondering why on earth he'd chosen that sentence from the infinite library of available sentences. He pours 2 drinks, then a third for himself, mostly because he suddenly feels as though he might need one. Now, come a little closer. This is one of those moments where memory still smiles. He nudges the bedroom door open with his shoulder, balancing the glasses carefully so nothing spills. The room erupts into laughter. The covers have become suspiciously animated. One hand emerges from beneath them, fingers curling with theatrical mischief, beckoning him forward as though everyone in the room had silently agreed to a joke he somehow hadn't been present to hear. For one suspended heartbeat, he simply stands there, unable to decide whether he's the victim of an elaborate prank or the luckiest fool in Southern California. He laughs. They laugh harder. And then, well, let's be respectful historians for just a moment. Whatever followed required considerably more trust than planning, a remarkable willingness to abandon awkwardness and go commando into the unknown, and the sort of youthful spontaneity that welcomes athletic prowess. Dmitri came up with an action plan instantly, and that was to stick to Alyssa until further notice. After all, they worked well together in these moments, and he clocked in hard and fast. Alyssa gestured to switch mounting places with her bestie. An upper lip became a saddle, and equestrian lessons began. No hand was left alone, all hands on deck, all hands finding the best places to arrive. After all, in a weird twist, all through proximity of friendship, each knew what the other desired most. All the right buttons were pushed, and a few wrong buttons were pushed even harder. By the time everyone had arrived to that final destination, Dmitri already wanted more, but he thought it impolite to ask for another helping. He'd learned to regret that, and then learn again to just be happy with the experience as it went. Now let's pause, because this is where the lesson lives. Most people would assume that the intimacy itself changed Dmitri. I don't believe it did. What changed him was the conclusion he quietly carried away from it. Until that night, commitment had existed in clearly defined colors. After that night, the edges blurred. Aquarius possesses a remarkable gift for questioning assumptions that everyone else accepts without examination. That gift has changed science, philosophy, and civilization itself. Unfortunately, the same gift occasionally whispers another question. If one exception existed, how many other rules are negotiable? That wasn't the chart making a decision. That was simply the chart illuminating a doorway that character would eventually have to choose whether to walk through. Life, of course, has impeccable timing. The weeks that follow are filled with success. Business opportunities begin appearing again. Creative projects multiply. Fashion events, fitness clients, late night brainstorming sessions. Every room Dmitri enters seems eager to welcome him, and every introduction quietly leads to another invitation. He begins believing that perhaps life is finally balancing the scales after failure. What he doesn't realize is that applause has become replacing peace. One feels louder, the other lasts longer. Only one can build a life. One evening at a fashion gathering, someone remarks that Dmitri seems to know everyone in the room. He laughs and shrugs. I just like people. It's true. He does. Aquarius genuinely delights in discovering people. Virgo moon delights in understanding them. Together, they create a man who can make almost anyone feel interesting within 10 minutes of meeting them. That's a beautiful gift. It's also a tremendous responsibility, because admiration has quietly become easier to find than accountability. The bottle? Do you remember the bottle? Look at it now. Every compliment fills it. Every smile adds another drop. Every person who says, "You're different, I like you," convinces him that perhaps the emptiness left behind by his failures has finally disappeared. Mourning always proves otherwise. Validation evaporates with astonishing efficiency. Self-worth does not. Unfortunately, Dmitri is still learning the difference. Now let's go home. Alyssa is sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with maps spread around her. She's planning a weekend escape, circling little cafes and coastal roads she wants them to discover together. She looks up as he walks in. I found this little place by the ocean, she says with genuine excitement. I think you'll love it. Notice Dmitri. His smile is real. His affection is real. Everything he feels for her is real. That's what makes this story so difficult. He isn't living two different lives because one is false. He's living two different truths that cannot coexist forever. You know, people often imagine relationships end because love disappears. I've rarely found that to be true. More often, love remains exactly where it has always been. It's clarity that leaves first, and once clarity packs its bags, the heart becomes astonishingly skilled at confusing gratitude with desire, admiration with intimacy, and possibility with destiny. That is where our wolf now stands, not lost, not yet, but no longer entirely certain which path still leads home. End of Act 9, Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 10. Ghosts don't stay buried. You know, I've always found human memory rather peculiar. It almost never places the deepest wound where the story begins. Instead, it quietly hides it beneath years of other decisions, allowing everyone to mistake the symptoms for the disease. Before we continue judging our wolf, I'd like to take you somewhere we've intentionally avoided, not because it's pleasant, but because without this chapter, the rest of his story becomes far too simple. This happened years before Alyssa, long before beach sunsets, shared apartments, or dreams about forever. Back then, Dmitri believed something with almost childlike certainty. He believed that loyalty guaranteed loyalty in return. It was a beautiful belief. History, unfortunately, had other plans. Let's borrow this memory. Dmitri is younger, still impossibly optimistic, working ridiculous hours, building his future one exhausting day at a time, and turning down opportunities that many young men would have proudly collected like trophies. He wasn't perfect, but he was faithful, entirely. Now, watch carefully. His girlfriend comes home late. She explains where she's been. Something about the story doesn't quite fit. A detail, a timeline, one tiny inconsistency. Virgo moon notices those things immediately. Virgo has an unfortunate gift. It hears the sentence beneath the sentence. He questions her, not kindly, not cruelly, just enough to hurt her feelings. She insists she's telling the truth. He eventually feels ashamed for doubting someone he loves. The next day, he arrives carrying flowers, apologizing for allowing suspicion to get the better of him. He tells himself that trust deserves humility. He believes he's just learned a lesson about becoming a better man. The flowers are accepted. The apology is accepted. Life appears to move on. Then history does something exceptionally cruel. A voicemail. Entire civilizations have collapsed because of letters. Your generation simply upgraded the technology. He presses play, expecting nothing of consequence. Instead, another man's voice fills the room with the casual confidence of someone who believes he belongs there. He isn't introducing himself. He isn't hiding. He's calling for her with the easy familiarity of repetition, inviting her back with the unmistakable assumption that she already knows the way. The flowers in Dmitri's memory instantly become heavier than stone. Do you understand what happened? He wasn't merely betrayed. He discovered he'd apologized for correctly recognizing the truth. There are wounds that cut the heart. This one cut his judgment. Let's pause here. Virgo moon doesn't simply remember pain. It remembers the equations surrounding it. I trusted my instincts. Then I doubted myself. Then I apologized. And my instincts were right all along. That sequence is devastating, because from that moment forward, every future instinct arrives carrying a question. Can I trust what I know? You'd think one betrayal would be enough. History rarely settles for one lesson. Months later, another colleague enters the picture. Nothing dramatic at first, just another name, another explanation, another person he isn't supposed to worry about. How many tragedies have begun with those exact words? You don't need to worry about him. If history had a ledger, that sentence would occupy several volumes. Time passes. Then one evening, the truth arrives without knocking. Dmitri discovers the affair, not imagined, not exaggerated, real, long-standing, carefully hidden beneath ordinary routines and ordinary lies. The timing somehow makes it even crueler. The following morning, she is supposed to leave for Hawaii, not with him, with the other man. Now I'd like you to look at Dmitri, not with jealousy, with compassion, because this isn't merely another man. In Dmitri's eyes, he's everything insecurity knows how to invent. Stronger, more handsome, a musician, the sort of comparison the wounded mind manufactures with ruthless efficiency. Whether those comparisons are fair no longer matters. Pain has never been particularly interested in fairness. Aquarius responds to betrayal in an unusual way. It doesn't immediately become bitter. It becomes philosophical. It begins asking questions that can either mature a soul or quietly poison it. If complete loyalty couldn't protect me, then what exactly was loyalty protecting? That's not cynicism. Not yet. It's the beginning of disillusionment. Capricorn Venus refuses to stop believing in lifelong love. That's the heartbreaking part. It still dreams about one extraordinary woman, one home, one family. But now another voice has joined the conversation. A frightened voice, one that whispers, "Never be the fool again." Fear has hired itself an attorney, and it's remarkably persuasive, not because it speaks loudly, because it remembers evidence. Years pass, the relationship ends. People congratulate Dmitri for moving on. They mistake survival for healing. Those are not the same thing. He carries the wounds forward, because that's what unhealed wounds do. They don't stay behind. They quietly climb into the passenger seat and introduce themselves to the next relationship. Now let's return to Alyssa. Suddenly the story changes, doesn't it? The threesome no longer exists in isolation. The first affair no longer appears completely random. Even the encounter with the former girlfriend's best friend begins wearing a different face. Not because revenge was consciously planned, because unresolved hurt has a remarkable talent for disguising itself as freedom. Somewhere deep inside, a younger version of Dmitri was still arguing with ghosts that had never answered for what they did. I've spent centuries watching people blame the stars for decisions the stars never made. The birth chart did not create this wound. It simply revealed where the wound would echo the longest. The heavens described the terrain. Life supplied the weather. Character still chose the road. You know what finally broke Dmitri? It wasn't losing the business. It wasn't temptation. It wasn't admiration. It was the quiet realization that he'd spent years protecting himself from being betrayed again, only to become the sort of man he once promised himself he would never become. There are moments when the soul catches its own reflection. This was one of them. Let's leave this memory here, not because it no longer matters, because now, for the first time, we understand that the wolf wasn't born in darkness. He was born from a faithful man who mistook unhealed pain for wisdom and carried that pain into the arms of someone who had done nothing to deserve it. That is tragedy, and tragedy, unlike blame, has something to teach us. End of Act 10, Episode 3, The Wolf and the Lighthouse. Act 11, When the Lighthouse Lets Go. People often believe the end of a relationship arrives with a slammed door, a dramatic confession, or one unforgettable argument. After watching humanity for longer than I care to admit, I've learned something quite different. Relationships usually end quietly, long before anyone has the courage to admit they've already begun grieving them. Let's borrow one final season, not one evening, a season, because endings are almost never moments. They're patterns, By now, Alyssa isn't looking for evidence anymore. She's looking for the man she remembers, and those are two entirely different searches. She notices the pauses before Dmitri answers simple questions. She notices the thousand-yard stare after long days, the absent-minded smiles that don't seem connected to anything happening in the room, and the subtle way his body sometimes arrives home before the rest of him does. No single observation is enough to accuse. Together, they become impossible to ignore. I've always admired women for this particular gift. Most don't wake up one morning suddenly knowing something is wrong. They slowly assemble a mosaic from hundreds of tiny pieces that everyone else dismissed as coincidence. One late night, one forgotten promise, one story that changes ever so slightly the second time it's told, one kiss that lasts just a little less long than it used to. By themselves, they're meaningless. Together, they begin speaking a language only the heart seems capable of translating. Taurus moon doesn't panic. It investigates quietly. Not phones, not pockets, not diaries. It investigates the soul standing across the room. Alyssa begins studying Dmitri the same way an astronomer studies a familiar constellation that's somehow missing a star. She doesn't yet know which star. She simply knows the sky has changed. Meanwhile, Dmitri has become exhausted, not from work, not from maintaining lies, from maintaining versions of himself. There's the Dmitri who walks through the front door carrying groceries and asking about dinner. There's the Dmitri who still dreams of growing old beside Alyssa. And then there's the Dmitri who keeps chasing pieces of himself through rooms filled with admiration, hoping one more extraordinary evening might finally silence an old wound. Living one life is difficult. Living three is eventually impossible. Here's something astrology rarely discusses. Every birth chart contains tremendous potential, but no chart can survive forever if the owner insists on pulling against themselves. Aquarius wants freedom, Capricorn Venus wants permanence, and Virgo Moon desperately wants coherence. Eventually, one of them asks the question the others have been avoiding. How long do you think we can keep pretending these contradictions don't cost anything? One evening, Alyssa asks him a question so simple it almost slips past unnoticed. Are you happy? That's all. Not where have you been, not who were you with, not do you still love me, just are you happy? You'd be amazed how often the simplest questions are the ones we spend years trying to answer. Dmitri doesn't respond immediately. For perhaps the first time in months, he realizes there isn't a convincing performance available. Every prepared explanation suddenly feels too small for the truth standing between them. I don't know. It's the most honest thing he's said in a very long time. Ironically, it's also the sentence that hurts her the most. People think honesty always heals. Not necessarily. Sometimes honesty simply confirms what the other person has been mourning in silence for months. Alyssa nods. She doesn't argue. She doesn't cry. She simply understands. Understanding has always been one of the quietest forms of heartbreak. I've watched kingdoms collapse with more noise than this conversation. No shouting, no accusations, just two people sitting across from each other realizing they've been carrying entirely different versions of the same relationship. Dmitri thought he was protecting her from the truth. Alyssa had been living beside that truth long before he admitted it. Love notices. It always notices. Capricorn Venus has one final lesson to teach. People believe Capricorn fears endings. It doesn't. Capricorn fears building something magnificent only to discover the foundation was quietly cracking while everyone admired the architecture. Once it accepts that the foundation can no longer support the structure, Capricorn doesn't leave because it stopped loving. It leaves because love deserves a house that isn't sinking. The following weeks feel strangely peaceful. That may surprise you. Most endings aren't loud. They're tired. The arguments have already happened inside each person's heart long before they're ever spoken aloud. By the time the words finally arrive, they're simply reading the verdict. Alyssa begins packing, not in anger, not in revenge, with extraordinary tenderness. She folds photographs between sweaters so the glass won't break. She wraps little keepsakes in towels because some memories deserve to survive even when relationships don't. There is something almost sacred about watching someone care for the history they're preparing to leave behind. Dimitri helps carry the last box. Think about that for a moment. The man who once carried her suitcase into their first apartment is now carrying it out. History has an exquisite sense of symmetry, sometimes far too exquisite. They stand together beside her car. Neither knows exactly what to say. Some goodbyes become too large for language. She steps forward and hugs him, not as lovers, not as strangers, as two people acknowledging that, despite everything, they genuinely changed one another's lives. I've always believed the final embrace tells you more about a relationship than the first kiss ever could. As she drives away, Dimitri doesn't chase the car. He doesn't make grand declarations or dramatic promises. He simply watches until the taillights disappear, and somewhere inside him a painful realization quietly settles into place. He hadn't lost Alyssa in a single night. He'd been losing her one compromise at a time. You know, I spent a long time believing this episode was about temptation. I was wrong. It isn't about temptation. It's about stewardship. Every relationship places another human heart into your hands and asks only one question. Will you protect what I've trusted you with? Sometimes we answer beautifully. Sometimes we answer too late. I'd like to leave you with one final observation before we close this chapter. People often ask whether Dimitri deserved forgiveness. That's the wrong question. The better question is whether he deserved the opportunity to become someone wiser because of what he'd lost. I believe he did, not because he was innocent, because remorse, when it is genuine, has an extraordinary way of becoming the foundation upon which entirely new character is built. Years later, Dimitri would still think about Alyssa, not with the desperate longing of unfinished romance, but with the quiet gratitude reserved for the people who unknowingly altered the architecture of our souls. She taught him something no birth chart ever could. Love is not merely measured by passion, attraction, chemistry, or destiny. Love is measured by the ordinary decisions we make when no one is watching, because those quiet moments become the beams that either hold a relationship together or slowly allow it to collapse. Thank you for walking through this memory with me. If you've recognized yourself in Dimitri, don't mistake recognition for condemnation. Awareness is often the first honest step toward becoming someone better. And if you've recognized yourself in Alyssa, don't let someone else's inability to protect your heart convince you it was never worthy of protection. Until next time, be kind to the people who trust you, be honest with the person staring back from your own mirror, and remember that the stars may illuminate the road ahead, but they never take the steps for us. End of episode 3.